Hello and welcome to the She Reads Romance Books podcast, the ultimate show for romance book lovers looking for the best books worth reading. I'm your host, Leslie Murphy, and in each short episode, I share my favorite book list of recommendations so you know exactly what to add to your must-read list. Join me as I explore the romance genre and have fun collecting book boyfriends along the way, because life is better with a love story. Hey readers, welcome back to the She Reads Romance Books podcast. I can't believe that May has already come and gone. Not really sure how that happened, but it's been a really great month in life and reading, and now we are heading into summer. The school year has wrapped up for us and my family, thank God. It's nice to have a bit of a reprieve from, getting up so early and getting the kids out of bed, making sure lunches are made, all of those things. I mean, I'm still getting up for work, but it's sort of a different beast, if you will, and I'm ready to have the time to, go to the pool or take some day trips with the kids while they still want to, or while I can at least still drag them with me, more like it. I'll be doing a few podcast interviews here and there, and of course, meeting up with the She Reads Romance Books book club over the course of the next 2 or 3 months, so I'm super excited for those things. Otherwise, we are kind of taking summer as it comes this year, and I'm kind of excited for a low-key one at that. But back to romance books. Today, I'm sharing with you the books that I read this past month and what I really thought about them. Did I like them? Did I not? Do I recommend them? I'm sharing all of my thoughts. Now, I read quite a few new releases, but 1 or 2 older titles to help you figure out where you should spend your time and money, or more importantly, where you shouldn't. So let's dive in. The first book that I read this past month was one that I was anxiously waiting to drop in my Kindle library, and that was Teach Me by Nev Wilder, which released on May 1st. This was one of my most anticipated romance books of 2024 because I am such a fan of her extracurricular series, which consists of some pretty hot romance books that are all set in college. I feel like I've gushed about this series before, but the first 3 books have to do with roommates falling for one another, and there's a lot of sort of bi awakening happening. But this one is a bit different, as it is a college student unintentionally falling for his new professor. So Cam is one of the heroes. He is a student who fell into drugs I can't remember if it was freshman or sophomore year. So he's been working really hard to get back on solid footing again, despite his parents constantly hounding him about his sobriety and their disapproval that he's into guys. He's kept his head down, working as a waiter and busting it in class, but he's also really missing human contact, as his only sort of experimentation with guys was when he was high on drugs those early years in college. So one night he goes to a club and has this really hot meetup with an anonymous guy who he later then discovers is his new professor after sort of putting 2 and 2 together. And so from there, they try to put an end to their hookups to protect the professor's job, but their connection, it's honestly just too great. So this, I would say, it's a really short read, but available in Kindle Unlimited and worth the read if you have this subscription and if you like age gap teacher-student romances. I was actually surprised that it is probably the least steamy romance in the series. I was kind of expecting some pretty hot scenes, but the most scandalous or hottest part of the book is how they sort of first meet up, which I won't divulge because I don't want to spoil it for you. It's an interesting hook, but after that, it's sort of just a typical teacher-student romance. Not that that's bad, but it wasn't really super unique or out of the ordinary for me. So I gave it 3 stars, but I'm so glad I did read it. Again, such a great book into a fantastic series. The next book that I read was The Paradise Problem by Christina Loren. This is a marriage of convenience romance where Anna Green, a struggling artist, discovers that she's still married to Liam Weston, a professor and son of a gazillionaire, who she married in college for access to subsidized family housing. But Liam, or West as he's called, reaches out to Anna 3 years later and tells her they are still married and asks if she would go to this private island in Singapore for his sister's wedding and pretend to be his wife so that he can eventually inherit his $100 million inheritance. Now, I'm such a big fan of Christina Lorenz, so it's pretty much a no-brainer that I will read whatever new release they come out with, which is why this book made my list of most anticipated new romance books of 2024 as well. While this book showcases their amazing writing chops, I gave it a 3-star reading only because I felt like it really could have been so much more. Maybe I shouldn't really dock stars for that reason, but I'll kind of explain. I find it's always super fun to read a summer romance that whisks you away to an exotic location, right? And that's exactly what this one does. I have never been to Singapore, but I wouldn't mind spending a week at a private island in a bungalow by the beach. It sounds amazing and a place to be for the rich and famous. But at the same time, the setting of this book, it could have been any private island or really any beach in the world, as they really didn't pull in too much of the culture at all. Not really a big deal, but I mentioned it because I just feel like it was sort of maybe a missed opportunity, perhaps. I also love that Christina Lorenz books are always so unique, right? Whenever I pick up their books, I know I'm in for just a unique storyline and some new interesting characters to meet. I don't feel like any one of their books is the same anymore, especially with their new releases. This book explores the toxicity of money and power and how it can corrupt a family. It's also about a narcissist, which Liam's father clearly is, and who is portrayed as such. I honestly thought this was the best part of the book, honestly, how money corrupts family, and yet there really wasn't much depth to this plot line from what you learn at the beginning. You know they have to put on a front that they're married to get his inheritance, and that's pretty much it, until the last chapter or two. And as for the marriage of convenience story, I was sort of expecting at least some build up to their chemistry or tension from when, at least maybe when they were first married, given what the book summary states. But it's just sort of glossed over that initial married period when they were in college, and then moves to when they only spend about 9 or 10 days in Singapore for them to fall madly in love with one another. I guess I could buy it, but yet at the same time, not really. So while I liked the premise of this book and other qualities, I didn't rate it higher because it was really hard not to compare it to other new releases of this year that I think really blew me away. I won't belabor it. You can read my full book review on the blog because I compare this book with my feelings towards Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez in why I rate that book 5 stars, but this one only 3. All of this to say, am I glad I read it? Yes, absolutely. Do I recommend it? If you're a Christina Loren fan, yes, absolutely. I just sort of expected a little bit more for that book. Okay, the next book that I read was Swift and Saddled by Lila Sage, which is a sweet cowboy romance in book 2 in the Rebel Blue Ranch series. I actually stopped reading the first book in this series that was super popular because I just wasn't jiving with it, but I enjoyed this one and I look forward to continuing the series. Ada Hart is hired on for a renovation at Rebel Blue Ranch in hopes of making a real name for herself with her design business. And the night before she's to get started, she ends up in this dive bar in town looking for food and connects with a really handsome stranger who she ends up making out with pretty hot and heavy in the hallway until they are interrupted. The next morning, she comes face to face with the stranger, who is Weston Ryder, her new boss and owner of the property that she's working on. This sets up a really fun forced proximity romance where the sweet cowboy pursues the city girl that he can't get enough of. I thought Weston was a sweet hero who had some good mental health rep in the story, as he isn't shy about disclosing his depression. Not that it really made an appearance in the story, but was just like a characterization point for him. I liked that he didn't force Ada into anything or make her meet his timetable. He just supported her wholeheartedly, and it was just the best part of the book. I think I rated this book a 3 too, because it was overall a really good read, but not one that I really have thought about since.
Nora will probably reread, but it was good and I enjoyed reading it. I've been in a Julianne Long kind of mood lately, and I really like her audiobooks. So I decided to do a reread or a listen to one of my favorite historical romance novels of all time next, and that is What I Did for a Duke, and I fell in love with it all over again. I loved the initial setup of the story where Moncrief, the Duke of Falconbridge, catches Ian Eversey in bed with his fiancée. The rest of the book, he holds the prospect of enacting some form of revenge over Ian's head, keeping the man on edge and unsettled, and I loved that power play so much. Alex's initial plan at revenge is to attend a house party at the Eversey house and seduce Ian's younger sister, Genevieve. But after meeting Genevieve, his plans soon change. I loved the love triangle aspect to this story. Poor Genevieve is distraught when her friend and crush, Harry, tells her that she's going to propose to her friend. She's heartbroken, and that's how Alex comes to find and meet her, and the two end up having these amazing run-ins and conversations during his stay that let them be real with one another and obviously spark an attraction. The way they used art as innuendo and the way they identified with Venus and Mars were these perfect sort of inside connections that lit this beautiful slow burn between the two. Their clandestine meetings at night where Alex showed Genevieve what it meant to feel pleasure were super hot and definitely not something that Harry would ever live up to. How they both ended up professing their love and Moncrief's sacrifice was just epic. Another piece that I loved about this historical romance. This reread just reaffirmed that whenever you are presented with the choice between the Harrys and the Alexes of the world, always choose an Alex. Always. Okay, I totally jumped on the bandwagon with my next book since I got a copy through my local library, and that is How to End a Love Story by Yulin Kwong, if I pronounced her name right. I'm so sorry if I didn't. And I say bandwagon because this was May's book selection for the Reese Book Club, I believe. So it's getting a lot of attention. Plus, given the author's connection as Emily Henry's screenwriter for 2 of her books to movies coming up. So here's what it's about in case you are not familiar with it, as it recently just released. Helen Zhang hasn't seen Grant Shepard once in the 13 years since the tragic accident that bound their lives together forever. Now a best-selling author, Helen pours everything into her career. She's even scored a coveted spot in the writer's room of the TV adaptation of her popular young adult novels, and if she can hide her imposter syndrome and overcome her writer's block, surely the rest of her life will fall into place too. LA is the fresh start she needs. After all, no one knows her there, except Grant has done everything in his power to move on from the past, including building a life across the country. And while the panic attacks have never quite gone away, he's well liked around town as a screenwriter. He knows he shouldn't have taken the job on Helen's show, but it will open doors to developing his own projects that he just can't pass up. Grant's exactly as Helen remembers him, charming, funny, popular, and lovable in ways that she's never been. And Helen's exactly as Grant remembers too, brilliant, beautiful, closed off. But working together is messy and electrifying, and Helen's parents, who have never forgiven Grant, have no idea he's in the picture at all. When secrets come to light, they must reckon with the fact that theirs was never meant to be any kind of love story, and yet the key to making peace with their past and themselves must just lie in holding on to each other in the present. Okay, what to say about this book? I went back and forth from 3 to 4 stars for this one, probably because I went back to write a review or my thoughts on it, and I was a bit blank and had to really think back on it, and that's always an indication of something to me. I am glad that I read it, but had I not been in the right headspace for it, I'm not sure that I would have enjoyed reading it given the subject matter. And this might be a little spoiler or not because you learn it soon in the book, but you can fast forward this if you don't want to hear. I applaud Kwong for writing a romance with an underlying theme of suicide, but I don't think this book will appeal to everyone. Though I have no frame of reference for it, I think the author approached this hard subject matter well, though I think Grant's struggle was dismissed for a majority of the book. I mean, what came of his panic attacks that this guy was having? The forbidden aspect of these two falling for each other was a bit taboo. You know, her falling for the guy who was driving the car that killed her sister, and it did keep me turning the pages. I'll admit the third person point of view got a bit confusing at times because I wasn't sure in whose head I was at certain times, or the shifts just kept happening abruptly. But Helen was a really interesting character. I actually loved how we came to know her true feelings about her sister's act, and that Yulin wasn't afraid to have her be mad at her sister. But her turnaround with Grant seemed just sort of a bit off to me. All of a sudden, she was like about getting it on with him, which just felt like a bit strange to me given her characterization from the beginning. I also understood that they needed space at times once they sort of got together, but it felt forced and maybe a bit controlling from Helen. But I guess that was sort of the point because Grant admitted that he would take whatever he could get from her. I did enjoy the screenwriting aspect since that is the world that Yulin comes from. It was really cool sort of being in the room, as it were, and seeing Grant actually thrive somewhere. So overall, I think this was a solid debut novel, an interesting choice of subject matter for a debut, so I would not call this a rom-com, and readers should definitely take note of the trigger warnings because it's heavy and wouldn't be everyone's cup of tea, nor a light read for the summer. But I'm glad I read it, and I definitely look forward to checking out more from this author if she continues writing more. So my next read was another book that I had been anxiously waiting for, and that is Truth or Woof by Anne Walsh, which is Walsh's paranormal reimagining of the first book in Penny Reid's Winston Brothers series, Truth or Beard. It is a werewolf small-town romance between the heroine Alice and the hero Ford. Here's what it's about. When hardworking citizen scientist Alice Ames reluctantly returns to Green Valley to restart her, or I think it's Moonlight Valley, to restart her stalled life, she plans to save up the money she needs to escape to Nashville and open her pet shop. She does not intend to inadvertently kiss Ford Boone, thinking he was his twin brother and her secret crush Atticus Boone, because Alice hates Ford and he's always hated her right back. But the two are drawn to each other, and Ford asks to court her, so why not have a relationship until she flees for Nashville? I think I started my review for Neanderthal Seeks Duchess by Lainey Hatcher, which is the first historical reimagining of her Knitting in the City series, the same way in saying that Penny Reid is a genius. But if Penny Reid is a genius, then I think Anne Marsh is amazing, because when Penny asked if readers would be interested in her Pennyverse worlds turning paranormal, I gave a big hell yes. And so Marsh has taken up that mantle and is reimagining Penny Reid's popular Winston Brothers series, starting with Truth or Woof. And if this book is setting the tone of what's to come, then I'm so on board and super excited. All the parts of the Winston Brothers series that I loved, including the bearded brothers, the small town shenanigans, the epic love stories, are expertly woven into this romance where the bearded brothers just happen to be werewolves. So as the first book in the series, I will say there is some world building to establish, but it didn't really overpower Allison Ford's central love story. I do wish, however, that we got a bit more of Ford as a werewolf, since that is sort of the big change of the series. And it's sort of one of my knocks on the book. So I'm hoping that we get more of the boys in their wolf form in the subsequent books. Otherwise, I felt like this book was a reimagining that stuck pretty close to the original story with just a different spin to it. I enjoyed that aspect though, and I think I was able to accept Allison Ford's insta-love because I'd already envisioned them as a couple, having read Truth Truth or Beard. It might be hard to get with the program as a new reader, as there really isn't a lot of history shared. It's just sort of assumed to build on that connection, but I just kind of went with it. I did feel like the ending was a bit of a happily for now, as the main issue of their courtship was finally discussed and a solution found, but not really acted upon. But given that, I'd say that if you loved Reed's Winston Brothers series, I think this is just a new way to enjoy it again in such a different light, which is pretty exciting. And so I will definitely look forward to reading book 2 in this series. And you can also stay tuned for my upcoming podcast episode with Anne Marsh, where we talk more about this book, her, again, taking up this mantle to reimagine this popular series as Werewolf Brothers. Also kind of talking about her author journey in how she writes with Harlequin romance and now with Smarty Pan romance. So stay tuned for that interview coming up very soon. My next book that I was also able to snag at the library, so I bumped it up on my list, and that is This Summer Will Be Different by Carly Fortune. This book is on my must-read summer romance book list and absolutely deserves to be, because it's the perfect summer beach read. I've mentioned it in that episode, but the quick synopsis is that Lucy, the heroine, travels to Prince Edward Island one summer to spend time with her best friend Bridget. Only Bridget missed her flight, so Lucy arrives before her and has this instant connection with the local who she has a one-night stand with. Only in the morning she realizes that Felix, Mr. One-Night Stand, is Bridget's younger brother, the brother she was sworn to not fall in love with. So Lucy ends up returning to PEI with Bridget many summers after, until the current summer when Bridget disappears to PEI just a week before her wedding, and Lucy follows her and, of course, running into Felix yet again. So Carly Fortune's books have been popular summer romance books for the past 2 years, and I get it now. I honestly didn't finish her first book because I wasn't in a cheating romance kind of mood, and I haven't yet read Meet Me at the Lake because I'm not in the mood for that topic either, but I am now sold on her work after reading this book. This Summer Will Be Different also made my list of most anticipated romance books of 2024, simply for that fact that the setting was Prince Edward Island, because if you didn't hear me say it in that episode or my summer romance episode, I'm a bit obsessed with the island and it's on my bucket list to go there. But this book surpassed my expectations and is a fantastic, sweet and swoony best friend's brother romance that is the perfect beach read for this summer. I joked in my review on the blog that Canada should be sending Fortune all the gifts because their tourism rates are going to skyrocket with people clamoring to Prince Edward Island after reading this book. I was honestly looking at Airbnbs and places to stay on PEI before I even finished it, thinking, can I swing a trip this summer or do I have to wait until next year? Because it has definitely moved up the list after reading this book. Now, Fortune makes you feel like you are a native on the island, from the oyster shucking contest to the beach walks, the lighthouse tours, and of course the Anne of Green Gables sites that are on the island. But while I love the brilliant setting of the story, I also truly loved the friendship between Bridge and Bee. I myself have a best friend who I consider more like a sister, and to come to understand the bond between these two was just so wonderful. And Fortune completely hooks you from the beginning with Bridget's sudden escape to PEI before her wedding, and I found myself constantly guessing the reason behind it and needing to read on to finally get to that point where the impetus is revealed. Of course, I also loved the central forbidden love story between Felix and Lucy. Their first meet cute was hot, though very closed door, but things definitely do steam up throughout the rest of the book. It set the stage to understanding their instant chemistry that would ignite each summer or time they found themselves together again on the island. Again, I found myself, though, just wanting to speed read to get to that point where I could understand, why are they not trying to make this work for real? It gave me sort of similar, almost kind of angsty, but in a good way, vibes as reading People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry, just trying to get to that moment where you understand all that was holding each character back. So from the setting to the story pacing to the characters and the overall story arc, I thought this book was a wonderful read and definitely a must-read book of the summer. It's claimed a spot on my list of best romance books of 2024 and one that I definitely highly recommend. Now, the next book I read this month, or I should say attempted to read, was Lies and Weddings by Kevin Kwan. Now, this review pains me to even mention because this book was on my most anticipated new romance books of 2024 list and my most anticipated books of summer 2024 list because I thought the setup and the setting of the book was just magnificent. This was, however, my first Kevin Kwan romance, and I was eager to dive in, but I stopped reading it at about 30% or so through it. By this point, I should be invested in the main characters and have an idea of where the love story is going. But unfortunately, I didn't feel either one of those. The only character that I feel like I've come to know at that point is the mother, and she's awful. She's meant to be awful. I understand. I just didn't care to know about either main character. Rufus, the hero, has been mostly absent in the story, and there's really no connection between him and Eden, the heroine, at all up to that point. To me, the whole point of the story so far is Rufus's sister's wedding, which is fine, but you have to set a foundation for the romance or it's just not there at all. I would probably continue reading it if I didn't find the writing very hard to follow. While I think the setting is unique and a huge part of the story, the description in this romance just got too much at times, and it drowned out the storyline for me. Plus, he has all these asterisks with these extra bits of info that may seem cool, but I found them really distracting and not entertaining or adding to the story at all. I'm sure the best part of the book is to come, or at least I hope it is. And I do think that if you love descriptive writing and cool locations and opulence, you might like it, but I don't think his style of writing is for me, so it went into my DNF pile. Big bummer. Now, the last two books that I read this month were rereads of two books for book club. The first was 9-Month Contract by Amy Dawes, which was our May 2024 pick. I think I loved it even more the second go around, or just certain things just sort of jumped out more to me having a reread of it. I also reread The Air He Breathes by Brittany Cherry, which, if you have not heard, is our June 2024 book club selection. I'm so excited to talk about this book and with Brittany in June. I read it to get our discussion guide ready for the start of the month, and I'm sure I'll reread it again at the end of the month, just before our wedding, so that everything is super fresh. It is available to read in Kindle Unlimited if you have a subscription, but it's also now available as a paperback in bookstores, so you may be able to find it at your local bookstore or at a Barnes & Noble. It's a definite change up from the rom-com 9-Month Contract, so you can have some tissues ready while reading it, but it kicks off Cherry's Elements series, which I thought was really fabulous. You can join the book club and discuss this book with us and with Cherry if you visit shereadsromancebooks.com/book club. The Air He Breathes is also going to have to count for my May Romance Book Reading Challenge selection, which was to read either a romantic suspense book or a book by an author of color. I didn't get to fit in a romantic suspense in Cherry's latest release, The Problem with Players, which I had planned to read for the challenge, didn't release until mid-month, and I just didn't have a chance to dive into it yet, but I'm hoping I will be able to this month. So that wrapped up my May month of reading. I would so love to also hear what you are reading. If you are not yet a member of my Facebook group, the She Reads Romance Books Reader Lounge, then jump on in, as we like to talk about the books we are reading and loving each week, as well as the book boyfriends that we are falling for. I will include a link to it in the show notes so you can join in the fun and discussion there. As for what I'm going to be reading this month, for the Romance Book Reading Challenge in June, the prompt is to read one sports romance or to simply choose a book by its cover. That's definitely an easy prompt. But as for sports romance, I'm going to have to think about that one. But actually, Cherry's release that I was supposed to read last month will fit because it's about a baseball player. So that one could work. For choose a book by its cover, I'm finally going to dive into my advanced copy of Ali Hazelwood's Not in Love. Yay! I absolutely love this cover, from the image and the colors used It's beautiful, and I honestly cannot wait to dive into the story, especially since she is calling it an erotic romance, so I'm super intrigued. I will report back on this in my June 2024 reading list episode. I'm also going to be reading Curvy Girl Summer by Danielle Allen, which has an awesome cover to it. I love the colors because they just pop off the page. You can catch my podcast episode with Danielle about this book in her writing, which will drop, I think, next week. So stay tuned and don't miss that episode. Lastly, I'm going to try to read The Graham Effect by Elle Kennedy. Ooh, will actually fit sports romance as well because it's a hockey romance. It's in Kindle Unlimited, and Karen in book club totally convinced me that I need to get on this series. So I'm going to do it, Karen. I am going to read The Graham Effect this month, so hold me to it. Thank you for the push and the recommendation. But I hope after this episode, your TBR list is overflowing, my friends, and that you have a fantastic reading month ahead. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to me talk about all of these books, and I wish you a fun month ahead and happy reading, because life is better with a love story.
That's all for this episode of the She Reads Romance Books podcast. I hope you enjoyed it and found some new books to add to your TBR list. If you did, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast app. It really helps me reach more romance book lovers like you, and I appreciate your support. If you're a book boyfriend collector like me, then you'll want to join my email list so you never miss a podcast episode or a new book list. Just visit shereadsromancebooks.com/join and sign up today. As a thank you, I'll instantly send you my list of top 10 book boyfriends that will make you swoon. Trust me, you don't want to miss this list. Thank you for listening, and until next time, happy reading.